A Confederacy of Dunces. Working as a librarian in a neighborhood branch library is the most rewarding job anyone can have. When the director hired me as branch manager in 2009, I replaced a supervisor who was not very popular with staff, so I was not following John Elway as the next Broncos quarterback. But I still had challenges. Since the staff had a very difficult relationship with their previous manager, they were nervous and skeptical at first. As soon as they realized that I was a fair manager, they started to trust me. I went out of my way to create a positive relationship with my staff, and I was more of a player's coach in terms of how I treated people with respect. Not that I didn't have some difficult moments with staff and administration, but for the most part, I was allowed to do my job how I saw fit. I'm not a perfect person, but I tried to do everything possible to support my staff in their efforts to provide excellent customer service for our patrons. Everything begins with the frontline staff. They are working directly with the patrons every day, and it is that special one-on-one relationship that makes a library successful. One of my favorite books of all time is A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. The protagonist, Ignatius J. Riley, is a man of high intelligence who could not find his way through life without running into constant roadblocks. He was a square peg in society, and Ignatius was continuously frustrated by the dunces who got in the way of his egotistical genius. The novel won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1981. Unfortunately, the author committed suicide 12 years before the book was even published. The book was finally published because Toole's mother made it her personal quest to find a publisher for her son's brilliant masterpiece. I first noticed Fernando when this 15-year-old kid walked into the library wearing the same hunter's hat with ear flaps as Ignatius J. Riley. Although the hat kept him warm in winter, he never removed it after entering the building. And just like Ignatius Riley, the dunces were conspiring against Fernando at this time in his life. He was a sight to see. A tall, skinny Hispanic kid who walked to the library after school and literally lived between the book stacks of our branch. He was one of the book people in training, and he couldn't get enough of libraries, and he read everything he could find in science fiction. As I got to know Fernando better, I found out that he lived in a foster home with another teenager, Danny. The two of them were like night and day. Danny, a ginger redhead, looked like trouble, but in reality, he was a pretty good kid. While Fernando was reading, Danny homesteaded a computer and spent his time with social media. Librarians should socialize and engage with their patrons only at the library. And like a parent, they should never have a favorite child. But Fernando and Danny were my favorite children. They always made me smile when they wandered in after school, because I knew they needed the library to survive. Fernando was a smart kid who was extremely polite and just wanted to read. For both Danny and Fernando, the library was their sanctuary. They were both terrified of their foster dad, and on occasion he stormed into the library and screamed at them. My heart went out to both of them, since I suspected they lived in this abusive situation at home. Librarians cannot cross the line outside of the library and get involved in things that aren't any of their business. While staff can help the patrons, it was forbidden, as it should be, to get involved in their outside lives. If you witnessed abuse in your library, you could call the police. However, anything you suspected was happening outside of the library was not your jurisdiction, unless you had some proof. Like most teenagers, Fernando and Danny were always hungry. It might have been because they were young, growing kids who needed to eat constantly, but I really felt they weren't getting the nourishment they needed at home. Danny and Fernando helped me from gaining a few more pounds because I saved them some of our extra food given to us. I know people shouldn't feed stray cats, but I had a soft spot for Danny and Fernando. It got to the point that they ventured into the library every day just to see what food was available. They devoured it in a few minutes, and I always felt good about supplementing their diet. At the time, I was divorced and didn't have a special woman in my life. Had I been married, I would have tried to adopt 15-year-old Fernando. He was already on the right path with his thirst for knowledge, and he would have been an easy son to raise. The timing wasn't right, and I couldn't cross that line. What I did do for Fernando was to encourage him and to suggest books he might enjoy. We talked almost every day, and it broke my heart when I thought about his living circumstances. I made sure to tell him how impressed I was with his intelligence and how important it was to develop his intellect by becoming an avid reader. I knew I wasn't going to become his father, but I wanted to let him know that his circumstances would get better and that he had the potential for a successful life. I was sincere in my praise, and he knew it. He needed to hear it from me, since all he heard at his foster home was anger. Almost a year after I met them, Fernando and Danny suddenly moved to another foster home. I don't know the circumstances, but they both told me they were living with a wonderful couple who took good care of them. They still visited the library to eat whatever food and snacks they could find. When Fernando graduated from high school, he immediately joined the Air Force. He was finally in control of his life, and I knew this intelligent young man would thrive in the military. About 6 months after he enlisted, he returned in his Air Force uniform. I couldn't believe this 6 feet 3 inches kid, who weighed only 120 pounds when he joined, was now a 180-pound man who was finally able to eat as much as he wanted at the military canteen. He was a medical assistant and was training to be a nurse. He wanted to make the Air Force his career. The military was willing to pay for his nursing education, and his life was on the right track. On the other hand, Danny had gotten his girlfriend pregnant and was on his way to becoming a 19-year-old father. Danny had to grow up quickly, and he did the right thing and married his girlfriend and took responsibility for his child. One day, he proudly waltzed into the library to show off his baby daughter. He had a sense of purpose and wanted to create the family he never had. Not all stories about foster children who come into the library have happy endings. Danny and Fernando, who are probably in their mid-20s as I write this, have overcome their personal hardships to become responsible men. The many wonderful young people I met and befriended during my career often have filled my heart with hope. For a couple of years, Danny and Fernando became my unofficial adopted children, and I take genuine pride in how they turned out. In 2019, one of my former employees told me that Fernando, not his real name, had fulfilled his commitment to the Air Force and was now enrolled at CSU Pueblo to continue his education and become a registered nurse. He had also gotten married and had a young child. She would occasionally work with Fernando since he was hired by the library as a substitute employee and was trained to cover the public service desk. Sometimes things go right for good people, and I could not be happier that Fernando took control of his life and defeated the Dunces.